Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Life Practice Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Lindsay Sturkey, and I'm here with Teresa McCloy. And we are continuing a series we've been doing on seasons of formation. And we've been talking about how our faith grows and evolves as we get older, and how often there are some themes that can happen in certain seasons and decades of our lives. They don't always line up the same as everyone else's, but in hearing the stories of others, we get to learn, what does this look like in everyday life? So we've had a series of interviews talking to people in different decades and different stages of life and faith. And for the next couple episodes, we thought we would take some time to kind of share our own story and experience with this. We've been hearing from other people and interviewing others, but we wanted to take the time to open up our own stories with you and share from our faith journey. So today we are actually going to hear Teresa's story, and she's going to share with us what that looks like for her. And the next episode, we'll turn that around and she'll interview me about my story. But today, Teresa, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. It's great to be back. I think the last episode you did solo. Great episode. And so, yeah, it's great to be back and maybe sitting in a little bit different seat today.
Yes, Teresa is the co host today, but she is also kind of the guest because I'm interviewing her today about her story. So appreciate you being willing to share with us. You've shared a lot of your story through your book and through our other podcast online, but there's always more to the story that we don't always know. And so I'm excited for our listeners to hear maybe some new things or maybe some connections that they haven't heard from your story before. So I know that everyone knows who you are, but would you share a little bit, just even for those who maybe don't know what season of life you're in, a little about your family and just kind of where you are now before we look back?
Sure. So, if you're not up to speed from other content and other places, I'm 65 or will be 65. Let me say that here in just a few weeks. And so I'm weird about always claiming my birthday before I think I need to ease into it. But it's a pretty pivotal, birthday often, at least here in the United States. When you turn that age, there's just some different changes and different things that you're looking at, and I think we've identified that as kind of this marker birthday, like we do some others, turning 40 or 50 or whatever. But 65 is what I will be. That's the stage of life that Dale and I are sitting in. My husband, Dale, and I live on a working family grain farm that is, I always forget which generation, but been around a long time. Fourth, fifth, something like that. We're sitting in those seasons. So well over 100 to 150 years that his family has been farming this land. And that's a huge part of our story, a huge part of my spiritual formation. We have two children, our son Eric, who passed away at 30 from drug and alcohol addiction. And that was in 2017. That's been a formational thing for me. Our daughter Annika, who's 29 and married and has a little 3-year-old grandson, again, a formational piece for me. And with my children, the formation of stories like infertility and adoption, things like that. So much of my formational has been formed through my family and through my children and my marriage and those things. As probably a lot of people would identify with that. And now at the season I'm in, so much of it comes from there. These past 10 years I've spent as an entrepreneur. I was that early in life, but as an entrepreneur, creating a company called The Real Life Process, where we work with people around their life story. That formational piece, we have some tools and frameworks that we use to create your modern day rule of life, and some other tools of life maps, one life maps that are helpful in some of that deeper work as well. And one of the bigger pieces that we've done in that work, along with other things, and Lindsay's a part of that team, is to certify others to do that work in the world. And so I could talk more about how that thread is in my story of creativity and different things. But yeah, that's the work that I'm currently doing. Love, love where my life is right now and appreciate all the goodness that God has brought into this season. It's not always been an easy journey to get to here. I'm sure there's other things that will be ahead of me, but right now I feel very blessed.
So before we kind of look at some things that are forming now, and I know you mentioned several kind of threads and themes that you've noticed in your story that have been deeply formational for you. Can you give us maybe just an overview of your faith journey overall? And that can be a big question of your faith journey, but what are some of the highlights or maybe some of the ways you would describe how your faith journey has grown and evolved?
Yeah, I was actually laughing because I've recently been in a process of applying to be a part of a program. And the question was, tell us about your spiritual formation journey. And I'm like, wow, do you want me to start at 2 or, at 22 or 32 or whatever? Because the more decades, the more seasons that you have, there's formation in each of those seasons. But I was raised in the church. My family was very active. My parents were believers. I was raised in a pretty traditional. I thought it was the norm. But as I moved to college and actually attended a Christian college, I learned early on that, at 17, 18 years old, that what I thought was the way everyone believed and was not the way everyone believed. And that was probably my first experience at that Christian college that I went to where I went, oh, there are differences in the world. There are different denominations. There are different, I really had a very sheltered upbringing because I grew up in a very small rural community, no diversity whatsoever. And again, this was in the late 60s, early 70s. My father was a farmer. Like we just had a very boxed in life and had some exposure, went to youth conferences, did some other things, but always in a boxed context. Uh, Church camp for me was very formational in my life. I worked at church camp. I attended. It's probably where my faith was grown the most and the deepest in those early years. But then going to college and going, oh, I have now diversity that I have to figure out, whether that be different cultures or backgrounds or skin color or whatever it might be. That was my first exposure. And I'm 17, 18-year-old kid. Made some good decisions and not good decisions during those times, in my faith journey. Did not stay at a Christian college. Again, we're talking 1979, 1980. So part of that formational story was, what does a woman do in the early 80s in ministry? There was no such thing as a worship pastor, or youth ministry was even a pretty new thing in the church space. I was there for music performance, so I discovered early on, this will not make me a living. This is not a career choice. So I left, and nor did I want to, at that point, marry a preacher, as they would say. Why is a woman here? And that's not what I wanted to be. I was a little bit more, not that that's wrong, but I'm just a little bit different in that. So independent would be my word. And I was independent with God sometimes in that season, in my early 20s. Long story short, got married in there. And then I think my first truly formational space would have been our struggle with infertility and walking in that. And then those losses and things became a theme throughout my life. I can name those now. I did not know it then, nor did I know what to do with it. But loss, grief, lament just became this cycle then of God's formation in me for probably the next 30 to 40 years.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing some of those just high level experiences of what that was like for you and those shifts and how you walked with God. You kind of named looking back, you noticed that theme of grief and loss. When you look back over how God was growing you, what do you notice now that you didn't necessarily notice when you were in it?
Well, I think the depth that you can actually go to as a human being and that God will be with you in it. It's kind of a cliche phrase that sometimes we say as believers or whatever. I'm like, well, I don't know how people get through things without their faith. And yet, I would say, I don't know how I would have survived emotionally. I don't know that my marriage would have survived because, my husband Dale and I joke sometimes of like, we have to hang together because we're the only two that have had the exact same story. At least from, I think I was married at 20. he was 23. So for 44 years, we have carried this longer than I've carried a story with anyone, right? So, but our marriage has been very tested in that. And uh, in other, relationship with children, loss, grief, they take you to your knees and really to that place. And I think this is even in my personality. I would say God has to get my attention sometimes in some really hard ways because I'm a pull up your bootstraps, do it on your own kind of girl and figure it out. And God says, no, you're not going to be able to figure this one out without me. You're not going to be able to figure this one out without me. I'm like, my gosh, I'm tired of learning this lesson, but I don't know that you and I have been talking about this recently. I think the theme of your life really does start to show, and you're like, oh, okay, God, this is familiar. I've been here before, but here we are again and something. And I don't love naming that because that means more grief and loss, possibly, or more lamenting of things, whatever that can look like. And it can look like a lot of different things, but that for me has been the noticing of the forming and how, it is only God that holds that together.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would love to hear, part of as we've been doing this series is noticing that in every season of life, in every decade, there are unique challenges, there are unique benefits. So as you think about where you are currently, what do you notice about your life with God and your own formation that is impacted by your current season and stage?
Mm. Well, I think in this current season, and just to kind of tie the thread all the way through, and I'm just noticing this. So I think that's some of the things of having some decade and some time, that's on one side of you compared to the other is one of the things that God has always brought me to is how are you going to, for lack of a better word, express this? In my early years, college years, and even as early as to go back, way back in my childhood, as early as fourth grade, my mom and dad bought for me an auto harp, which is a musical instrument that you press down and it plays the chord for you, almost like a guitar that you strum. Life changing for me because it gave me the expression to create music. And I began very early on taking my auto harp, shutting myself in my room or taking it out to the woods or wherever I could get alone and writing music. And I still have some of those early songs written on, they're fading because they might have been written in pencil or a piece of paper about all kinds of things that I was walking through. Crazily enough, my relationship with my dad is a song that I wrote early on, worshiping God. But that theme carried of creative expression somehow. And I just realized that in the past, probably maybe 3 or 4 years since I wrote the book, Do What Matters, Live from Rest, Not Rush. I'm like, oh, this is another creative expression. So whether that be in music, in writing, when I was in worship ministry, my creative expression came through putting together a worship service, picking the songs, the flow, what was visually going to be on the screen. I think when we can notice not only the theme, but then how did I live that out in that season? Sometimes it wasn't always lived out well. There was a season, and I can talk about it now, where I worked at a music store and sold pianos and organs. Way too young to be selling anything that expensive, but that's what I did. And I became very interested in what I would call the band scenes following bands and going to bars and places I shouldn't have been to listen to those bands and not saying all that's wrong. Now I can look back and go, that wasn't as bad as I was, but I felt like I was doing something wrong. Again, very traditional, boxed in thing. Felt like I was being very sinful. I wasn't, but I felt it. And so, you know, sometimes our expression, well, however we're living it out, can be in some unhealthy ways. And that's part of our discovery of formation. The farther away you get from things, you go, I was doing the best I could with what I knew. at the time. And I was forming, and God was right there with me in it. My desire to, "Oh, no big deal, we can't have children, we'll just adopt." And, within 3 weeks, I'm on an adoption path, and I'm doing it. I didn't take a lot of time in it. Now I look back and go, "Oh my gosh, how much was I pushing an agenda?" But yet I was doing the best I could with who I was in that season. So I think sometimes we have to give ourselves a lot of grace the older we get to go, "Oh God, thank you for being there with me, maybe even protecting me from some
Mm.
really crazy ways it could have played out." Or even if it did play out crazy and unhealthy, like the grace and the forgiveness to go, "You were with me and I was doing the
Mm.
best I could."
I love how when we look back over our story, even like you said, where, man, I skipped over some grief there. I kind of pushed through. Yet you can still look back and see how God was forming you even in that, even when we don't, get it right or do it maybe the
Or
way
yeah, or
that.
said in the time, like,
Yeah. Yeah, like, if
um,
we were facing that today, we might do it different, yet God was still forming us then, and there's often so much connection to how he's forming us now as well. So when you look at currently, as you notice the theme of grief and loss in your story, and then how you notice it now, what does that look like for you now in this season, and how might it be different than it was before?
well, I think one of the things I'm a very forward moving type of personality. So one of the things God has formed in me through grief and loss is the ability to connect to slowing. And when I need to slow, the practice of slowing, a new word that's coming up for me a lot is release and releasing things and taking time to do those things. Just because I'm older and I am slower. But that rest piece, what does rest look like in my life? And not just rest as in rest, take a nap or, take a day off, but really deep rest because of, even the loss of our son Eric in 2017, 8 years out from that, almost going into the ninth year soon. It's different now. It is still a deep hurt, a deep pain, a deep loss that God is in in it with me, but I process those things differently now. I look through a different lens of God's goodness and grace and gratefulness of how, that didn't cause our family to fall apart, that as unfortunately it does with many families, that we've been able to develop our own selves out of that and to come into a new season that we're in now of just being able to walk with others and their stories and their hard things. And so I think you just take that and just go, what's the next? I very much look at life as a forward person. I can still catch myself like going, oh, what am I gonna do next year? What about the year after that? And what I can think in the future. So I have to really connect to the part of me that's God in the present and God in the peace and be in that, connecting of head, heart, body space. Don't know that I'll ever change at my core, but I'm much fuller. I don't know if that's a word. I'm at living from a holistic place rather than the drive of who I am. Now, for other people, that story might be different. But for me, I've lived a lot of years from a drive underneath, and I don't feel that I still drive, but in a different
Mm.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. Teresa, I you named both the grief and the loss as a theme, but also creative expression as a theme. What how do those connect for you? What is as you've noticed those two themes, what has come up for you? How is that showing up now?
Yeah, I think the more that I sit with this idea of, oh, I'm still, that's how I express myself, the more that I become comfortable with, oh, I'm a writer. Like that's even a weird sentence for me to say. And you've challenged me a lot on that as a friend and a writer, which I think it's interesting, how our stories have overlapped and yet we're in different decades and different seasons, but yet you and I have connected through, you have always loved to be creative and write, and I'm just finding that. And so our energies are different in those things, but yet I think that's why community is also a huge theme for me in my stories. So, grief, loss, community, and creativity somehow those all stir together in a pot. In this season, the creativity is coming more through writing. 5 years ago, it came through developing our rule of life process and that framework. You heard me talk about in my early days, it was through writing music and then through worship ministry. I am an entrepreneur. I love the entrepreneurial world. And most entrepreneurs, they can call it a visionary. I am that, but I think visionary means create, build, um, problem solve sometimes, but it's more about what's possible. Creativity comes from that. What's possible and what can happen. I will say the dark side for me, the dark night of the soul part, or whatever you want to say, the adaptive side would be what's possible. What can I go create and go, oh, yeah, God need to be in
Yeah.
this with me.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. Instead of going to create from my own strength, which
Yeah.
I could probably fake my way through about anything. That's a false belief that I have. And so letting go of that and going, what does God want to create here?
Yeah.
It's a whole different posture that I'm still working on and forming.
Yeah.
And that's the next season is God is
Yeah.
forming in me. What does God want to create here? How can I leave my hands open? Not going, here I go,
Right.
running with my hands closed, little fists, like, look at me go. Need for approval is something I have to always identify, and whose approval am I looking for?
Yeah. Well, I could see how that would be an even further invitation to slow down. And living from that place of rest and not rush is that we have to slow down long enough to discern there's all these things I could do and I could just go forward and make them happen. But really noticing, okay, God, what are you and I going to create together? And that requires us slowing down and noticing what God's inviting us to.
And for others that might be in, close to my season or whatever, I think too, we're out of the doing. We're out of a little bit of the, I'm responsible for other human beings that are living in my home under my roof and all of that. I'm still always amazed that I get to an end of the day and go, wait, I don't have anyone I'm responsible for. I could kind of do what I wanted. That has some people get to enter that season earlier than I did because we were later parents, but also our son Eric never launched from our home. He did in certain ways, but not in others. I was always responsible for him until he was 30 years old. And I know there's other people that I've talked to that care for someone or whether it's another adult or a child or whatever. And that is such a hard thing for me still to this day. And it's been 8 years. Our daughter Annika moved out at about the same time Eric passed away. So we went very empty nest quickly in some hard ways, grief and loss. And yet, underneath in my core, my routine and my rhythm still says, oh, so living into this season of rest that God has given me, knowing what my body's been through, my mind has been through, my heart has been through, is still an invitation of like, I've worked through this a lot in spiritual direction. I don't have to do another thing for God to love me.
Mm.
I could just rest in him. Now, I don't
Yeah.
think that's my calling. I've been experiencing it, in a practical way just to share, what does life look like? Gail and I recently purchased a camper, used camper. We've done a few little camping trips. We're exploring like, what does that look like? And what I feel in rest when I go away somewhere and park the camper and just do life at a different pace, walk in the morning to the campgrounds or the woods or a trail or wherever we're at, a slow and easy breakfast, doesn't feel like retirement to me. That's not what I'm looking for at all. But it feels like this little gift of God just saying, come away with me
Yeah.
and rest with me for a few days and, longer Sabbath, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just looking for those pockets of God. what are you calling me to? And it's flowing with purpose and with the work I'm to do in this season.
Is there anything else you would name as you mentioned that transition and the significant birthday of turning 65 coming up, and how for many that is a significant marker or a transition? And what else have you noticed, or what do you feel like you're discerning? What is God inviting you to? What does that particular shift in season mean for you?
Well, I'm going to put out a little bit of a challenge maybe to those that might be listening, whether you're entering this kind of season that I am, or whether there's something significant that you can feel. Maybe it's you're turning 40, you're turning 50, maybe age markers are a thing for you, or you know that you're going to move into empty nest, or your kids are going to enter high school, or there's something that's going to be a transition. I would encourage you to begin to, whether that's journal as a practice or write or, you know, blog or whatever. It doesn't need to ever be seen by anyone. But one of the things I decided to do last year, I love to challenge myself with some types of commitments that I do something regularly. And it was to write every Sunday a blog that I would write, and I call it rest notes. And I've written that from 64 to 65. When I first started, it was just kind of for me, and I was sharing it with some community. I think eventually it's going to be put out, in some book form that we may be working on. Um, but that noticing of on a week to week basis, what is shifting in me is where some of these themes are starting to emerge of creativity. It's really looking at where is God speaking to me in this. I'm not trying to write ahead or do much. It's what's right now. And also, there's a little bit of it of what would I want to capture about this season? What would I want to remember if I go back at 70 and read 5 years back? What would I want to notice about God's movement in my story? So I would challenge people a little bit to whatever season you're in, but especially when it's something important that you feel shifting, to just capture it for a season. So you have that reference. One way you could do that is through the life maps that we have. There's a great map on Life Story. But that for me, I would have never said what it's done in my own transformational journey to help me prepare for what God has for me next, and to name some of those things and to rest in those things.
Mm. That's such a good practical example of how to notice God in our season, especially like you said, when we're coming to a transition, that noticing what God's doing now can give such light into what is coming next. And just that practice of reflection. And like you said, that can look so many different ways, but I've loved reading those and getting to see just a glimpse of what God's doing through that practice that you embraced.
Well, I know you love it, Lindsay, because you are the journaler that I have not been. And that pressure for me of, oh, journal every day is not me. So don't take, but there is something about writing things down. I type, I don't write. And sometimes I speak it before I write it. So you kind of have to find your rhythm around it. But I am going to be very grateful for those things. And I'm yeah, I'm really embracing, like, what am I capturing right now that will be helpful for me to process 5 years from now?
Yeah.
And so many different ways that you can do that, but that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. We actually have a whole season on the practice of journaling that
We
I'll
do.
link to in the show notes if you
I
want
love that.
ideas. I do. I love it. And I love that there's so many ways that can look,
It does.
even if you don't think you're a writer.
I mean, because, if anyone listening has known me for very long, another way I do it is with a picture every day.
Mhm.
That's my form of journaling. So use what you have and what speaks to you. I take a picture every day. I write something about it. I post it on Facebook. Again, never meant for everybody else, but it has become something that many people follow and read. But it was really for me to just start to process the grief and loss. There's something good in every day after Eric had passed. And so I've done that for, gosh, we're getting close to 3,000 days. So that's crazy. But I always say I don't journal, and a lot of people remind me, yes, you do. You just do it through pictures. I always have to buy phones that have a lot of memory now because even though they're on Google Storage and all of that, like pictures, visual is a way that I see. We have people that do it through art, people do so your story can be told and captured many different ways, but I really am leaning into maybe it's my memory is going, but um I just think there's such value in having a way to reflect back.
Yeah. So, Teresa, as we kind of wrap up, is there any encouragement you would share, whether you want to share to people in your current decade or maybe people who are maybe a few steps behind you, but what would you want to leave us with today?
I would speak to people in my decade right now or
Mhm.
in, 60s, 70s, whatever is, and I won't get my high horse about it, but you are not done. That at least here in the United States, we have this thing of, oh, I'm going to turn 65. I'm going to retire. Do I have enough money? There's just such a mindset around. And yet I believe, and those that I try to look ahead that are my mentors, that you're just now in the greatest season of giving back. You do have time, you have space, you have energy, you have wisdom. It may look different for you, but please, please don't do the disservice to those around you, to your family, to your circle of influence, your sphere, whether that's in your current career or that you're leaving or other. Be a mentor, be a guide, be a spiritual leader, give back to your church. Nothing wrong with enjoying life too. Dale and I plan to do that. I think that's God's beauty and gift in this season. But gosh, and just the culture that we've created that you just sit back in your rocking chair and, you know, get up and just go throughout your day. Oh, that with no purpose or plan or ability to give. Everyone has so much to give. Whatever you've walked through, someone else needs to hear your encouraging words and your prayer. And yeah, just, I don't know, wither away, I guess, in this season.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Teresa. I love getting to witness as a friend, as a teammate, as just what God is forming in and through you in this season in a unique way. And I love how you've expressed that, gosh, those of you in a similar decade, we need your wisdom, we need your presence, we need your experience. You're not
We need
done
your
yet.
babysitting. We need
That
all
too.
the, all the things.
All the
Yeah.
things. Well,
Well,
thanks,
I
Teresa.
appreciate
It's so good to hear more of your story. And I know that our listeners appreciate getting to know you better. And it's so encouraging to hear what God is continuing to do.
Thank you, friend. We're going to reverse here in a couple weeks and
We
hear
are.
from you as well. So this has been a fun series. We've had a lot of good feedback and listenership, and we always appreciate your comments and what you share with us back as well.
So do make sure to check out the show notes. We have some resources for you there. There is a free download for the season about life development questions. And these are some great questions based on your season of life that can help you explore your own story. We also have a link to our tool that we mentioned today of One Life Maps that you can either do a subscription if you do this work of listening to others. It's a great tool to help you walk alongside others in their story. We also have a personal download where you can look at not only your past story, but your present reality and the future invitations of God, all connected to your story. So make sure to check that out. And like Teresa said, we will be back in a couple weeks with a new episode, and I'll be sharing some of my story. And we look forward to connecting with you then.
Thank you, friend. Have a great week, everyone.